Okay, so a pleasant day to each and everyone. Okay, so for today we will be discussing about chapter 5 as well as with the abstract, the last two parts in the preparation of your manuscript. Okay, so in the chapter 5 it is entitled the summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations, and this will be the subheading for chapter 5. Okay, so when we say the summary of findings, they are actually a synthesis of chapter 4. So all of the results that you have presented in your chapter 4, from the presentation, analysis, and interpretation, you will make a summary of which, okay, and it is to be presented in order of the presentation of our statement of the problem. So it is expected that if you have five sub problems in the statement of the problem, then it is expected that we will also have five items in the summary of findings. Okay, so the summary of findings summarizes only the important findings. So there is no long, the finding should no longer be explained or elaborated. It should be stated as concisely as possible, and the finding should be in answer to the sub problems. Okay. So in short, we will just summarize the presented results. Okay, per item. Okay, in your chapter 4. Okay, I want you to focus particularly on the analysis and interpretation, and you make a summary of it. Then that will be your summary of findings. And then the next part is what we call the conclusion. It is a reasoned judgment, an inference based on evidence, and a final summation. It is actually a generalization of what you have presented in the summary of findings. So, in just one statement, in just one sentence, you will have to make a generalization, an inference, or a final summation, okay, of what you have presented in the summary of findings. Okay, so the results must not be confused with conclusions, and results are just facts, whereas conclusions represent a higher level of abstraction. Okay, so be critically and creatively drawn from careful analysis, synthesis, and evaluation of information, and you have to lead the reader from the particular findings of the study toward a generalized interpretation of findings. It should be concisely and categorically stated. So as I have said before, you have to state it in just one sentence. No more explanation. Okay? It should not contain any numerals. Okay? The figure that you have presented in your chapter 4, it should not be presented in the conclusion anymore. And one conclusion may cut across more than one finding, and it is also possible that one finding can have two or more conclusions. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that if we have five items in the summary of findings, you only have five conclusions. It is possible that you can have more items in the conclusion as compared to the summary of findings. Okay, and of course, the all of the conclusions must be backed up by your data. Okay, there should be a basis. Okay, you cannot just make a conclusion, a generalization based of thin air. No, it should be based on what you have presented in chapter 4, and it should be based on the summary of findings. Okay, and then the last part is what we call the recommendation. Okay, so there are two parts in the recommendation. The first is the actions that are recommended. Okay, that is based on the findings of each sub problem. Okay, it should not be based on personal biases or preconceived assumptions. Okay, so it means that if we make a recommendation based on the result of the study, okay, we have to, it has to be backed up, okay, by the data that is presented in your conclusion. Okay, and then the second part is the recommendations for further research. It is for future studies, for the future researchers. Okay, you can recommend ways that the study can be improved upon and how the future studies might contribute to the field. Okay, so the recommendations may arise from constraints imposed on the study, conditions beyond the control, the different questions, or further confirmation of findings. In other words, those are the things that you have not done in your research, and you are actually recommending it to the next batch of researchers. However, it is expected that we have more items of recommendation based on the findings as compared to the recommendations for further research. Okay, so I'll be giving you an example. If you click the sample file, it will lead you to the sample chapter 5. You can use this as a reference in crafting your own chapter 5. Okay, so in the presentation we have the level 1 heading, okay, the summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations, followed by the introductory statement. Okay, and then this is how we present the summary of findings. No? So in here it is itemized uh, based on the sub problems that you have presented in your statement of the problem. Okay, so in this example we have 7 items, okay, in the summary of findings. It means that there are 7 sub-problems, okay, that you have presented in the statement of the problem, and it has to be presented in order of presentation of our SOP. Okay, then the next we have the conclusions. Okay, as I have said, it is presented concisely, and the conclusion is also itemized. Okay, but as I have said, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have 7 subheadings or 7 specific problems. It can The conclusion can have more items depending on the generalizations that you can draw from your summary of findings. So in here, in this example, we have 12 conclusions. Of course, the conclusions stated herein are based, okay, from the summary of findings presented. Okay, and then the last part is what we call the recommendation. No, so the first part will be the recommendation based on the result of the study, and then the last part, okay, is based on the recommendations for future studies for the future researchers. As we can see, there are 10 items that are recommended based on the findings of the study, and there are only 2 items that are for future recommended for future research.